Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, I am here tonight joined with Gnostic priest, Golden Dawn adept, author, magician, scholar, exorcist, Enochiana pioneer, man, myth, legend, Aaron Leitch. Aaron, how are you doing tonight?
Wow, thank you. I'm doing great, and thanks for having me on. This is really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on my little podcast. I really appreciate it. It's actually an honor.
It's always fun to do this, so thank you for inviting me.
Definitely. So you have a lot of experience and personal kind of gnosis under your belt, so to speak, in regards to spiritual pursuits and all that kind of stuff. So just want you to feel free to expand on anything in whatever depths and detail that feels fitting for you. Don't hold back.
Okay.
And yeah, so some of my questions, they might seem a little basic, but I want to ask a couple of things in particular because it's just, I think that you'll provide like a more insightful answer than the average bear. So yeah.
Maybe. I hope so.
Yeah. So, okay. So, some people, when they hear of occultism or esotericism and they're not really investigating beyond the internet memes and all that, maybe their minds automatically might have the tendency or programming to just sort of lump this whole thing into the category of something like Satanism and kind of make this correlation. And to me, it's like a small Skittle in a large jar of candy in comparison. So I just wanted to ask you, like, in your estimation, what is a Satanist? Like, how would you describe someone who is satanic, or what is Satanism or Satanisms? Because it seems to me like there's a few different satanic ideologies or versions that may have kind of emerged. But yeah, what's your personal like assessment of this thing? Like, what's the meaning and intentions behind the movement? Any of that?
Yeah, there are different versions. As you know, there's different sects, there's different movements with different beliefs and such. But the if you want to talk about official Satanism, I even hate to use the word official, but when most people refer to Satanism, they're talking about the Church of Satan. There's also the organization, the Temple of Set, and there are others that I'm not even aware of their names. But back in the day when it was still just the Church of Satan, their big thing was atheism. You really couldn't be a Satanist if you actually believed literally in Satan. They simply adopted Satan as a symbol, the way they looked at it. And I'm taking this from the early writings, like if you read Anton LaVey's The Satanic Bible and other things that he wrote, and some of the other earlier material, the concept was really simple. They looked at the world and they saw the damage that had been done to the world by the church, from the medieval Catholic Church all the way up to, your mega churches of today and that kind of thing. They looked at the harmful aspects of Christianity, and they decided, well, if these people presenting themselves as the good guys are the bad guys, then their enemy must be the good guy. So they adopted the enemy of Christianity as their symbol and called themselves the Church of Satan. So, but at the core, they were atheists, and they really just believe that, you're only here once, get all you can get out of it while you're here. I've read enough about Anton Sanders LaVey to know that he was not exactly a good person. But I've also known a lot of people that are members of either the Church of Satan or some other satanic movement, and they're not evil people. They're not they're not kidnapping children or committing murders or anything. It's really just a philosophy that they're following. Like I said, in the original Church of Satan, they very hardcore atheists. I mean, you could not be there if you believed in anything spiritual or any kind of God or anything. But then at some point the Temple of Set broke off from them. And in the Temple of Set, they actually do worship Set, the Egyptian god Set, and they, have rituals to him and everything. So they took a lot more theistic stance toward it. But even they weren't, dedicated to evil or anything.
Yeah. And
so it's. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, what's the kind of like archetypal representation of Set and what Set represents in that instance?
Well, for them, and I don't really agree. Historically, I don't really agree with them, but they feel that Set was the ancient form of Satan, that what became Satan to, say, the medieval Roman Catholic Church evolved from Set to the Egyptians. Mm-hmm. It's not really their fault for viewing it that way, because that movement arose at a time when most of the, well, I don't want to say up to date because it was kind of getting old at that point, but the most recent information that they could have had on ancient Egypt came through sources like E.A. Wallace Budge. And for those of you who don't know, he was a major mover in Egyptology in like the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was a scholar, and he produced some of the earliest translations of the Book of the Dead that we have now. You can still buy his translation, actually, of the Book of the Dead. And we have a better understanding of ancient Egypt, or Kemet, now than E.A. Wallace Budge did when he was translating all of those old hieroglyphs. So he was kind of, and this is a problem with any time a work is translated from one language to the other. His assumptions and his own cultural filters were affecting his translations. Mm. So he looked at ancient Egypt and saw them as basically an ancient form of Christians. Instead of Jesus, they had Osiris. Instead of Satan, they had Set. So that was the standard of scholarship at the time that movement started. So the Temple of Set simply picked up on that and went with it. And I'm talking like way back. I don't know what their stance is. I would assume they know probably a lot more than I do about the history of Set, by today, But this is all stuff I encountered in my early days, even going back as far as the 90s.
Definitely. And then what about, like, say, Luciferianism? Do you see that as a different strain, or what's your estimation on, is there any relation between the two?
Well, that's a little kind of in a gray area with me, because I would call it like it's basically a theistic form of Satanism. They are worshiping Lucifer. They believe in the existence of Lucifer, and rather than siding with Jesus, they're siding with him. It's just it's the same deal, just the flip of the coin, the other side of the coin. But a lot of, like, if you run into Luciferians, they're mostly involved in a movement called demonolatry, where it's the worship of demons. And I don't exactly have the highest opinions of demonolatry.
Yeah, and so that's kind of interesting too, like, because I'm like pretty novice in my understanding of a lot of this stuff, so I might represent something incorrectly, but maybe something like the Goetia or the Goetic demons, because I do understand that there's some systems that are not considered Luciferianism or satanic that work with things like the Goetia. Is that correct? And then so I guess maybe the difference would be in the worshiping aspect, or how would you kind of view or describe that?
Well, remember these movements, demonolatry, Satanism, Luciferianism, Steadyism, all of those guys, they're fairly recent in history. You know, they come from the 1900s. These books like the Goetia, other grimoires that deal with, you know, demons and such, there was no such thing as, you know, Satanism at the time, not as we understand it, you know. But there were plenty of things that the church defined as Satanism that were actually going on, but actual, you know, people actually gathering together and having black mass and stuff, that's pretty much fiction. I mean, there's just no evidence for that at all. But what was really happening, and this is a major thesis in my work, is that during the medieval and Renaissance periods especially, so we're talking about the height of the power of the Roman Catholic Church, they employed so many people at that time. I mean, like literally you would be raised, you know, your mom would tell you growing up that someday she was going to ship you off to the church so you could get a proper education. It was like going to college, you know, so going to seminary and being ordained and becoming active in the church was just something a lot of people did. And they ended up with a huge surplus of clergy. So they had more than enough people to run the churches, and that left a whole lot of clergy with nothing to do. So what they did was they kept practicing the religion, but kind of at home. And a lot of these people were ordained exorcists. They were faith healers. They were dealing with sick people day in and day out, you know, laying on hands and trying to cure people and such. So they were just left with a disconnect from Mother Church, but still wanted to do good, so wanted to do work. And so what ended up happening was this trimmed down version of the church's rituals were written down, and those became the grimoires.
And
so it was basically their exorcism techniques and the entities that they had worked with, and that got them in a lot of trouble with the church once they found out what was going on.
Is this what would be referred to as the clerical underground?
That's exactly what Professor Kai Keffer was referring to as the clerical underground. Yes.
Okay. And so I'm really right now I'm kind of really interested in learning a lot about like Gnosticism and the different forms. You know, I'm vaguely familiar with some stuff, but like one of the things I'm really excited about to learn more from you is Gnosticism. And so like Sethian Gnosticism, is it correct that they view like the demiurge as seen as Satan pretty much? Would that be like a fair, accurate estimation?
Oh yeah, straight up. The Sethians, who are considered some of the original Gnostics, because Gnosticism is just an umbrella term that we use today for a whole lot of different sects. But the Sethians were some of the first, and they just straight up, they looked at the Old Testament and they saw some of the really awful things that the God of the Old Testament would do. You know, oh, I don't like your city. It doesn't have the right hospitality, so I'm just going to knock it over and kill everyone in it. Or, oh, hey, your wife looked back over her shoulder, so now she gets to be a pillar of salt. Or hey, I'm just going to flood the whole world and murder everyone. Just all these things that, from a Christian perspective, the God that Jesus described, there was a conflict there. How can that God of love do those things, And so the Gnostics simply decided that, well, because it wasn't all God. And anytime you see God acting in this petty way in the Old Testament, that was actually Satan posing as God. And there is actually a verse in the New Testament that states Satan is prince of this world. And they took that very seriously, that Satan, if he's prince of this world, they just kind of assigned him to be the creator. And the reason that creation is imperfect and that there is evil in the world and that there's pain in the world is because it had to have been created by an imperfect creator. So they just decided that this world must have been created by Satan. Mm-hmm. And their entire goal was they believed in reincarnation, and their entire goal was to perform rituals and spiritually advance to the point where when they passed away, they could leave the wheel of reincarnation and actually go to heaven and not have to come back here to Satan's realm.
And I believe, if I recall, you maintain yourself more of a Valentinian view, and is that correct? And
I do.
so
I do.
Valentinians, they view the demiurgic conversion from darkness to light and how this all took place or something along those lines. Is that?
Yeah, it's funny because the Sethians were among the earliest Gnostics, if not the earliest, and the Valentinians were absolutely the last. Well, there's the Manichaeans, but that's a whole different and very sad story. But the of the original Western Gnostics, the Valentinians were the last ones, and they were so difficult for the church to wipe out because they were being led by a Catholic priest, and he was teaching a very Catholicized version of Gnosticism. And it's not the Catholicization of the Gnostic philosophies. That's not really what attracts me to Valentinianism, but it has a lot to do with their view, or Valentinus's view, and what he taught of the demiurge, of the creator. And what he did was he looked back in the Old Testament and said, well, yeah, sure, there's this kind of demonic being in the Old Testament. It's doing some pretty terrible things and acting like a petty, jealous child. But then there's also a God there being described as doing wonderful and beautiful things. And if you take the Catholic view of Satan, and he was Catholic, he said, well, Satan couldn't have created the beautiful things in the world. So he reasoned that there must have been a dual force at work in the Old Testament. And so the bad things he could pin on Satan, but the actual creation of this beautiful world that we live in, he attributed to a higher God, a higher power. And in his view, he just took the existing Gnostic mythos where the demiurge was this petty, blind, jealous tyrant of a god. But he said Jesus, as part of his ministry, he didn't just minister to humans and people, but he also took time to pull the demiurge aside. And yeah, this would take so long to explain, so I don't want to like bore anyone who's listening, but essentially the demiurge in the Valentinian view, actually in most Gnostic views, the demiurge was blind and was not aware that there were higher forces above him. He really did think he was God. So, we're not talking about a Lucifer versus God, like rebellion in heaven situation. The demiurge literally had no idea that he was the lowest manifestation of all of these creative forces above him. So Jesus took him aside in the Valentinian mythos and said, hey, dude, this is what's happening. You have a mother. Her name is Sophia, and she wants you to come home. And, and you have a father, and you have all of these, eons. Those are super archangels who live even above the seven heavens. And he says, all these great, wonderful beings of light are waiting on you to come back, and converted him. And so now the demiurge, he left the demiurge here to basically maintain the status quo, to just basically keep running the universe while the plan, capital P plan, plays out to get all the light that has been mixed into the world rescued, and all the people that have been reincarnating forever and ever can finally break free of the wheel and go back home. So that's the Valentinian. That's the Gnostic mythos, but with the Valentinian spin.
Yeah. In a conversation that I had with Ike Baker, he had actually kind of paralleled what you're saying there. Basically, I think what he was saying is like the descension of Christ, or the Christ event, even made the demiurge repent, so to speak, something along those lines. So yeah, that's
exactly
really fascinating. Could you elaborate on the pleroma?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, it goes back to Plato. Before Plato, if you look at like any pagan culture worldwide, we all shared a very similar model of the universe. There were realms. There were the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And you'll find that in the Far East. You'll find that in the West. You'll find that everywhere. That was the basic understood structure. But then Plato came along and came up with this whole allegory of the cave thing. And what he was postulating with that allegory and what he taught was the concept of archetypes, that everything we're seeing in the world is just shadows being cast by something bigger that's beyond our view. So Plato came up with the idea of, we have the physical world, we have the heavens above, the earth under our feet, the underground beneath us, but there's a world beyond those three spheres that we can't see with our mortal eyes. And that these three spheres are just reflections of that archetypal sphere. And a lot of religions jumped onto that idea. And you'll find it in the Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah has 4 worlds instead of 3. And the highest world is Absolute, which is called the world of archetypes. That's Platonism. And the Gnostics were absolutely Platonists. So they believed in the 3, the underground, the world, the celestial world, but then they believed in a higher archetypal heaven. And that they called it the pleroma, which means the fullness. So, and again, remember, this is, we're talking Platonism here. So you have pure spirit, and then you have physical dross, and then you have this space where the pure spirit and the physical dross are interconnecting, they're touching each other, and the dross is contaminating the spirit. And that little place, that little gray area where the pure white and the pure black are intersecting, is where we all live. Again, the realm of shadow. So the Gnostics, the Jewish Kabbalah, a lot of not just the Platonists, but there were a lot of Neoplatonic movements. Hermeticism adopted it. All of them believed in this idea of a realm beyond the physical realm, including the 7 heavens, or however many heavens your particular religion believed in, because the Gnostics preached 30 heavens, and the Egyptians had, I think, hundreds of heavens. Depending on what, that's a 3,000-year-old religion, so whatever number you pick, they had them. So yeah, they believe that beyond all the heavens was the pure realm, the pure white realm, completely unmixed with anything physical. And the Gnostics call that the pleroma. That is where Sophia, wisdom, resides. Then she's the mother. And that is where the Logos, or the Christos, Christ, not Jesus, but Christ, resides. And that is where the Creator resides. And it's beyond our comprehension, and it's beyond our reach, unless we can get off of the wheel of reincarnation.
Yeah. And would the Ogdoad, is that something that's encapsulated within the pleroma, or is the pleroma like beyond the Ogdoad, or what's the relationship between those two things?
I've looked into that thing. That's from a particular sect of Gnosticism, and it hasn't really drawn my interest much. I have looked into that, and it's a little hard to decipher, because different sects would kind of interpret things differently, and they would have different names for things. But it does seem to me that it was, because in ancient Egypt, they had the Ogdod, that was their version of primordial chaos. So before Amun-Ra came up in the lotus and then called the land and the sky down and set the world the way it is, you just had the deep, you had this abyss. And they called that the Ogdod. I may be mispronouncing it. And my Egyptological studies were so long ago. But yeah, there were like these 8 gods, I think, that lived in there, and they had forms like frog forms, and I'm pretty sure that what's that one that was picked up by the white supremacists, Kek? Remember that frog creature that got real popular?
Yeah.
He was actually based on one of these.
Was it Pepe the frog or something? Or is that different?
Yes, it was Pepe the frog, but they combined him with the name Kek, and you would see that name with him a lot. And Kek is the name of an old Egyptian chaos deity who had a frog form, so that's why they were associating him with Pepe. But yeah, so that's where that comes from. It's from ancient Egyptian religion, and at some point, because Gnosticism was born mainly in Egypt, Christianity was born mainly in Egypt, and spread from there. So I think this particular Gnostic sect had picked that up. And so as far as I could tell, like I said, I'm not claiming that if someone else corrects me on this, go with them if they've studied and understood this better than me. But it seemed like they were taking that ancient Egyptian concept and applying it to what other sects would have called the pleroma. And they were like, and maybe these 8 beings were like eons, like the original versions of what in the lower worlds would manifest as the heavens or various archangels or whatever. But I'm kind of taking my understanding of the Gnostic scriptures that kind of drew me and kind of applying it to those. So again, I say I could be misinterpreting, but that's what I got from it. Is it was their way of describing the pleroma, but how exactly they had it set up, I couldn't crack. Not from what little I read on it.
Yeah. And so is the pleroma seen generally as what's referred to as the Father in a lot of, like, say, Christian doctrine, or is it within Gnosticism as well, or how do you see that thing?
Well, the thing is, when you get, if you think of everything as a stack of pancakes, you know, the lunar sphere, the Mercury sphere, you go all the way up to the Saturn sphere, then you've got the band of fixed stars, which is the barrier. The Gnostics call it the Great Barrier, and they symbolize it by the cross. And on the other side of that Great Barrier, on the other side of the fixed stars, is the pleroma, the pure spiritual realm. In that realm is the Logos, or Christos, and Sophia. And those two are about as far as we can go. Like, literally, we cannot understand anything past them. Every Gnostic sect came up with all sorts of little patterns and trees and stuff to explain all the different eons and how they related together. But we as humans really can't know anything beyond the mother and father, you know? So is an eon a super archangel that's like a person you can talk to, or is it a span of time? It's called an eon, right? And by the way, that's true of the Sephiroth as well. Are they places, or are they sayings? Because Sephar means to say. Are they, you know, so and that's indicative of the fact that we can't really understand. It's a nebulous, we don't know. So to say that the pleroma is the Father is kind of both right and wrong. Like, you wouldn't call the Father O pleroma. The pleroma is kind of interpreted as a place. But here's my interpretation. Other Gnostic priests may disagree, but here's how I look at it. It all begins with the Father. And even calling it the Father is incorrect, because you cannot name this thing. We cannot comprehend it. We can't name it. We can't speak to it. We can't describe it. So any attempt you make to describe it is 100% wrong, because it's indescribable, including everything I just said, by the way. So anything we try to say is wrong about this original source. But whatever the source was, we think of it like a mind, like something that I want to say like a brain, but no, like a mind. The programs that would run on your brain, the software actually running. And the way it's described is that mind woke up. That mind became self-aware. There wouldn't be what we understand as time there, so there was no before or after. But for our little monkey brains, we simply say that it was, at some point, it was not self-aware, it just existed. But then at some point, and for some reason, it became aware that it existed. And that's why even in the Kabbalah, the highest name of God associated with the highest sphere Kether is I am. Because it was that moment of, oh my God, I exist. I think, therefore I am. And so this mind becomes self-aware. So sentience is the first thing that was created. And that sentience manifested as what we call the Logos. And that's why the book of John says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Because the Logos is literally God's awakening. He's not the first thought that God had. It's literally the awakening, that moment. And then God begins to think. And those thoughts pour out in pairs, perfectly balanced pairs. But just like Xerox machines, and for your audience who's never heard of a Xerox machine, it was this ancient thing that we used to chisel on stone and make copies of pieces of paper. But if you took a piece of paper and ran it through a Xerox machine and made a copy, and then you take that copy and you run it through the machine to make a copy, and then you take that second copy and you run it through the machine, every copy will produce a more faded and distorted version of the original. And this is what was happening in the mind of God. the thoughts were going out and out and out and out, and the further out they went from the source, the more imperfect they became. And that is where, and I won't get into this unless you want me to, but this is where the real saga of the Gnostic mythos begins. Because once the thoughts became imperfect enough, and like I said, they were coming out in pairs, there was a male and female for each. And when they got imperfect enough, the final pair, the male said, we can't do this again. I want to stop. But the female, Sophia, wanted to continue. And so she produced another thought of her own, but without her balanced other half. And so what she produced was the demiurge, the creator. And that's where the whole, she really freaked out. I mean, literally every time you've ever suffered, every time you've ever been sad, every bad feeling you've ever had was from the reaction she had in the moment when she realized the mistake she had just made.
Wow.
She felt every human emotion, or what would later on become human emotions, because we haven't been created yet, right? And so, yeah, the entire saga plays out. And of course, it incorporates everything you see in the Old Testament, but with an entirely new interpretation. And it has to do with this creator, Sophia's son, stealing a portion of her light. Now, like I said, he didn't know she was there. He didn't realize he was stealing this light from his mother. He was just grabbing light that he saw. And then he used that to create the world and the universe as you see in the Bible, as you see in Genesis. So that's the pleroma is, well, really everything is. The pleroma is the mind of God. And the beings, the eons who inhabit that realm are the thoughts of God. And so are we. We're kind of this weird little nightmare that God's having over in this one corner of his mind. Yeah. And while he tries to clean up this weird little drama that's taking place over here. But the pleroma, the heavens, the physical world, even down to the lowest depths of hell, are all encompassed within the mind that we refer to conveniently as God. But we do believe it is a mind and that it is conscious.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the basis of it all.
The pleroma, or there's that word plerosai, I think it is, which it seemed like they're kind of related, because I think that plerosai is related to like wholeness or something along those lines. So that kind of reminds me of.
I'm not immediately familiar, but they do sound like they share the same root.
Yeah.
Like wholeness, fullness, pureness, because it's that Platonic idea of there being a perfectly pure state, and then there being this mixed,
or fulfillment or something along those lines.
Some bad, yes, some good, some bad. Basically, our world, it's some of it's great, some of it's not. And the Gnostic philosophy is the entire point of the Gnostic religion, really, is to very slowly purify the light and get the dross back out of it and get them unmixed again. That's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So that what you were saying kind of was, I think, going to lead into my responses that were coming up with what you were saying. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on that was interesting, because you're talking about the aeons and their relation to potentially time or beings. I had remembered and recalled a conversation I had a while back with a guy named Dr. Douglas Gabriel, and he was mentioning something called time beings, and in terms of like the hierarchy of creation. So maybe that's kind of what his model was going with, something along those lines. I don't know if it would be like a dual function there or something, but that's kind of what it made me think.
I'm not familiar with that time beings. I'm not. I could like guess at what those are, but I'm not sure if I would be close to what he was using the term for. I'm not familiar with it.
And then
because usually Gnosticism, anything on this side of the Great Barrier, so from the fixed stars all the way to us, we're all subject to time. So in my view,
I guess I was thinking about the aeons being outside of time. I don't know.
Yeah, and they're called aeons. They're called that's a name for span of time. So it's very nebulous and hard to grasp what's really going on up there. But I think it's that way by design too.
Yeah, and then it's interesting too, like what you're saying. It's interesting with like the common traditions of the Christian Trinitarian models, where they would say like things like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but then like maybe the Gnostic versions, like you're saying, the Christos, the Sophia, and the Holy Spirit. Is that like a fair?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah, there's, when you're doing things like, let's say Golden Dawn work or Rosicrucianism or Hermeticism. Well, I mean, like today's Hermeticism, which has been influenced a lot by Christianity and such. Even like the grimoires, because those are a very Christian manifestation, of occultism. And you have to keep in mind that when they pray to the Creator, they are literally praying to what the old Gnostics, especially the Sethians, would have considered Satan.
Mm.
So if you're reading the Key of Solomon and it says, I exercise thee by he who created all things. Well, a Sethian Gnostic would say, well, you're praying to Satan then, because that's the Creator. Because they never had that, the highest God, this mind that has literally dreamed all of reality into existence. They do not see that as separate from the Creator. There is no demiurge. There's no separate. The Gnostics introduced that concept. So if you go, like for instance, the old Merkava mystics, they're also called Jewish Gnostics because they adopted a lot of Gnostic philosophy into the Merkava system. So it's almost they're very similar, but you have that same dichotomy where the Merkava system does not have that middleman demiurge between the highest God and us. It's just all God. So, and that's another reason I like the Valentinian view, because in the Valentinian view, anytime you're praising a creator who created the beautiful things in the world, you're praising the Logos, you're praising the Christos, the highest God that humans can comprehend, and you're not really praising the demiurge. So you always have to keep that in mind when you're using these other systems that don't make that differentiation, that you're not praying to the demiurge in those. you're praying to a higher power.
Okay, so with the Christos as the highest God that one could be able to come into contact with, and then so like say like the relationships, and you might have already answered this and maybe I missed it or something, but the relationship between the Christos and Sophia, would you view them as like consorts of a sort, or
oh, absolutely. It's in the Valentinian scriptures. That, remember when I said that when Sophia saw that she had made this mistake, she had given birth to this God, but he was blind, he was mad, he was insane, basically. So she covered him in darkness. So when you open the Bible to page 1, and it talks about there was nothing but the void and there was nothing but the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving on the water, just nothing was there until let there be light. That opening scene of Genesis starts after Sophia pulls the darkness over her son to hide him. And as I said, she experienced all this grief, every negative emotion you can, from shame to anger to sadness to loss to everything. And when she exploded with these feelings, which of course affected her son, the Logos came to her. The Logos heard this and came to her. And this was actually part of a larger story going on, because the Logos also, all of the eons, all of these thoughts were very tumultuous in God's head. So his thoughts were just all over the place, and he was very rambunctious. And it was the Logos who calmed all of the thoughts down, all of the eons down, and got them all into the right positions and places. And as part of that, he found Sophia in her grief and had to fix her as well. So he is the one that rescued her. And it was the two of them that made the plan, the big plan, to rescue the light that the demiurge had grabbed. He had grabbed hold of her light just as she sealed him in darkness. And as the Valentinian scriptures describe, they do it in a roundabout way, okay? They say that the Christos, the Logos, he got the title Christos after all of this stuff. So he came as the Logos, the Word. But he came with this retinue of angels who were just escorting him. It was his what do they call it? Entourage. It was his entourage.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's rocking up on the scene with his homies, right? And it weirdly describes Sophia falling in love with his entourage and mating with them and producing all of these not quite angels. They're like baby eons, but there's like super archangelic entities that came from this union. And that there's a whole story that goes on with them. But what they're really saying there, and they're trying to sidestep it, the entourage is just put there because they can't say what they really mean, is that Sophia, the mother, and the Logos, the father, mated. They fell in love. They are, if you study alchemy, they are the king and queen. They are the mother and father of Wicca. They are, any archetypal male and female polarities. That's them. They all originate with these two.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they actually mated. And when they mated, they produced not just all these super archangels I just described, but the main thing they produced was the Holy Spirit. So when the Christos / Logos and Sophia become one, that makes the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the part of them that can come through that barrier that Sophia put in place. That Holy Spirit is the one part of God that can come down through that barrier and meet with us face to face. So that's where we get the New Testament, when that dove, a symbol of the Holy Spirit and of Sophia, comes down from the heavens to Jesus. That was the Logos. That was the Holy Spirit. That was Sophia. Logos and Sophia in one, as the Holy Spirit coming down onto Jesus. And he
Okay. So that
Jesus
was
of Nazareth became Jesus Christ.
okay. So you want to reiterate what you just said. So you just said that the Holy Spirit that was descending down during this Christ event was the Logos as Christos and Sophia, not just Christos.
Yeah, it was Christos and Sophia in one, which is the Holy Spirit.
Okay. That's a connection that I had not made. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's the secret of alchemy. You have the mystical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, and they say there's all sorts of alchemical secrets hidden in there, and that's what they're showing. You're taking the mother, you're taking the father. It's chemistry, and you're combining them. Thesis and antithesis, combine them to make a new synthesis, which might be a medicine, or it might be turning lead to gold, or it might, whatever it is. And that is producing that synthesis. That's the Holy Spirit, the synthesis of the mother and father. So when Jesus was baptized, that was when that spirit came down and he became Jesus Christ.
Wow.
So everything in red from that moment when he was baptized in that river by John the Baptist, everything in red isn't Jesus, the carpenter and son of David, speaking. It's actually the Logos. It's actually the Christos speaking.
Wow. All right. That's awesome. Okay. So then something like, say, like the Kabbalistic Ein Sof, would this be viewed as like the source that the Logos or Christos and Sophia derived from? Like, is that like
Absolutely.
the main?
Those three veils, that's basically where the Kabbalists just took the pleroma and just had their own divisions for it. So you've got the Ein, which means nothing, no thing. Then you've got the Ein Sof, which means limitlessness. And then you've got the Ein Sophor, which means limitless light. So when we look up and we see that divine light above us, we're just seeing that bottom veil.
Wow.
And that's their description of the pleroma. So in the Gnostic sense, if you're going to use Kabbalistic terms, which you really shouldn't because they're two different systems, but they're related, historically related systems. So yeah, the Absolute, the fourth and highest world, which is where you would find not only Kether, but the three veils. That's the world that the Gnostics would have called the pleroma. And that's where the Christos and Sophia come from.
Man, this is so cool. Okay. So I have a note here. I don't remember what it was in regards to. The Church of the Blessed Mary of Angels lineage. I don't remember if this was in regards to something I maybe heard on a previous recording of yours. Is that related to?
Yeah, that's the church that I'm ordained in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's probably why I wanted to ask then. That's cool. And is that one actually in Arizona, or did I read that incorrectly?
Oh no, we're in Florida.
Oh, Florida. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. I had to keep it quiet for a long time, but I have permission now to talk about it. But um, I don't know how much you know about Golden Dawn history,
A little bit.
but the history of the Golden Dawn, and I swear I'm not going to go off on this for hours because I could.
Yeah.
But the history of the Golden Dawn actually began. Now we're talking about before the Golden Dawn. It began with an organization called the SRIA, and that was it was a Masonic organization. You had to be a master Mason to join it, and it was a Rosicrucian organization. It was paper based, and when I say paper based, I don't mean their lineages. I mean like the way you got up through that order was just you would do a study, you know, to get a collection of books or whatever, study them, and then submit an essay, and then or a thesis, and then you go up to the next grade, and that's how you went up through the grades. So there were several members, and by members I mean guys who held the position of Grand Master of the SRIA. Oh, and by the way, it meant Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia is what SRIA meant. So the Rosicrucian Society of England is what it literally was. And these guys, many of whom had been Grand Masters of the organization, were getting tired of the paper-based advancement, the test-based advancement. They wanted to do actual practical magic. So those guys got together with some other important people and founded the Golden Dawn. So the Golden Dawn was very much structured very similar to the SRIA. It was basically the SRIA, but with magic, and they also admitted women. And that was a strict rule from the beginning. So now let's forget the Golden Dawn now. Their history is colorful enough. But the SRIA still exists. And they had a branch here in America, which was also called the SRIA because it's the Societas Rosicruciana in America. So I like to call it the SRIAM. And it ran here for a while, but then they did a few really weird things. Number one, they decided to adopt the initiation ceremonies of the Golden Dawn, because by this point, Rigardi had published all of those rituals. And don't believe it when people tell you how absolutely angry and upset everyone was that Rigardi published those rituals. That is nonsense. Everyone bought a copy of that book because how awesome was it that you didn't have to handwrite those things anymore? You could just have them in a book. You know, so everyone got that book, and there were a lot of people, including the SRI America, decided to just start using those rituals because they were right there, you know. And they also decided to start admitting women like the Golden Dawn does. And once they started that, they could no longer be associated with the very Masonic SRA Anglia. So they cut ties. The organization did eventually found another branch here in America, and they're still around. It's the SRICF, Societas Rosicruciana in Confederalis. No. Something Federalis
or something, or...
yeah, something like that. I forget. I'm not up on their history like you'd think I would be, but they're still around. Like I know people that are in the organization, and I'm gonna get emails on not knowing what the C and CF was. Okay, so they're still here. The SRI America continued to operate just under its own flag for a while, and then it ended up shutting down as well. Before it went into complete abeyance, all of its paperwork, its warrants, everything was in the hands of one lady. And when she passed away, or I should say before, obviously, she passed away, she bequeathed all of that to Tabitha Cicero. So Tabitha Cicero decided she wants to refound the SRI America. And so now she's been working on it for like years now. The pandemic put threw a huge monkey wrench into the middle of that. But she made a lot of progress. I mean, like writing brand new rituals for the organization, you know, not just using Golden Dawn ones or even old SRIA ones. getting, I mean, she's been doing a lot of organizing. I don't even know half of what it would take to resurrect an order like that, but she's been doing it. She's initiated several of us into the organization. In fact, the very first person that went through it wasn't me. I was present. It wasn't me, but we gave him the name Frater Aleph because he was the first through. And that's
cool.
all. I shouldn't even say that much, but I won't say anymore. But I just thought, we all thought that was so cute. So yeah, so it's back, but it's nascent. And now, what has this got to do with my lineage in the church? Well, back in the days, while the order was running under its own flag, there was also an attached church. It was very much a Trinitarian style church, and it was for the members of the order and their families. So as part of this resurrection of that organization, Tabitha has refounded the church. She's given it its own name. The Church of the Blessed Mary of Angels is the name she's given this. So it's not like a copy of the old church.
Yeah.
But this is going to be for the same purpose. It's a church attached directly to the SRIA. But as that goes, I'm right now the only ordained priest in that church.
Wow.
Chick and Tabitha, of course, are both ordained, and they both have their titles. But I'm the only priest, and I do masses here at my house. And of course, being ordained comes in very handy with the Solomonic work that I do. But other than that, like, there's not a building yet that you could go to. We're not that far. There's not a building you could go to and attend services, and I don't give mass every Sunday to a congregation. I had a little one when I was in Tampa. Most of them were Golden Dawn members. A couple of them weren't. They were just friends of ours from online and stuff, and they would come over. Yeah, we started having mass at least once a month, and that was before we moved.
Wow.
But since we moved, and of course, right after we moved, the pandemic hit. So yeah, that just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of it's kind of in abeyance right now, but it's still there. And it'll in time, just like alchemy, you got to be patient and let that Athanor do its thing and let these things go. Absolutely. But yeah, my lineage, it's my lineage, which was your original question, is through Chick Cicero. And I'm very hard set on this. I will not discuss my lineage past Chick Cicero, because I don't think it's my place. I mean, like, you would know some of these names, and I don't think it's my place to try to, especially since I run a business. I don't want to make it even sound like I'm capitalizing on, their names or anything. But I will say I was interested in my lineage as well. And right after I was ordained, I asked Chick and Tabitha if they could show me my lineage. And I was expecting just, a few names on a list. They handed me, it's not in here, but they handed me a notebook like this thick.
Wow.
And I have never seen a more incestuous, winding path in my life. Dude, everything, every lineage is in there. It passes through the Roman Catholic Church. It passes through several theosophy, Gnostic lineages, because there was a period, especially in the 1900s, where theosophy and Gnosticism were like one and the same. So there's several theosophical lineages in there. I mean, there's lineages to like every branch of Catholicism. I mean, it just went on and on and on. Everyone joined everything. So, when people ask me what my lineage is, I'm like, well, it's everything. It goes, it winds through all of Western history, going back to Jesus himself. What do you want me to say? And I'm not gonna present that book for people, and I'm not gonna try to drop names and stuff. I'm comfortable saying that Chick Cicero ordained me.
Yeah.
And I look at it, if it's a matter of legitimacy, you have to start with saying that Chick Cicero is illegitimate, and good luck with that. I mean, that is a very well-connected man in the Masons and the Golden Dawn, and in the Gnostic lineage. I mean, this guy's been at this for a very, very long time, and I feel sorry for anyone who wants to question his sincerity and his legitimacy. So if that's not good enough, and I've met people, I go, well, Chick Cicero, who initiated him? Well, that's not your damn business. Well, then you're illegitimate. Well, then think I'm illegitimate, because if you can't trust me and Chick Cicero in the occult world, if you can't trust us, I mean, then I can't. What am I supposed to say? I can't talk you into it.
Yeah. That's so cool. And bless Tabitha for all her work, and Chick. They both
Well,
seem
she
like
works herself to the bone. I
just
tell you what,
amazing humans from
both of
what I,
them do.
yeah.
Yeah, both of them do. But Tabitha, she's Wonder Woman, man. I tell you what.
Yeah. So I was gonna save this question for later, but I don't know, maybe it might be kind of related to, I don't know. So like I've heard it was it's some conversation and it kind of like made me want to ask this question. What are some things or anything that you may disagree with in regards to things that Sam Mathers did?
Oh God, a ton. He was a terrible person.
Was he? Okay,
Oh
let's talk
yeah.
about it.
If Sam Mathers existed today, I would very much do my best to get everyone in the occult world to turn their backs on him and never mention his name. He was a megalomaniacal, very cult-minded danger. I mean, you think Aleister Crowley was bad? Why do you think Aleister Crowley was his boy?
Hmm.
No, Mathers. There's this. I want to say it's kind of an urban legend, but I don't think that's the right term because I really think this is true. But there's this idea going through gold, some of the old folks in the Golden Dawn and related, that Mathers was just kind of by himself, kind of not great. Like, I mean, we're talking about even literarily, like if you read stuff that he wrote, it's not great. But then when it came time to write the Z documents, something possessed him and took over, and just all this wonderful, beautiful, like intricately interconnected symbology and these astonishing rituals just poured out of him. And once it poured out of him, it was right back to the crap.
Wow.
So Mathers himself, and and I'm being really harsh on him, and I really would, like, if I knew him, if he were around today, I don't think he would fit in. I think he would be a style of occultist. I think all of them back then, Westcott, Mathers, Crowley, Moena, all of them, they were just so, I don't even know the right word, but there was this Victorian nose in the air, hoity kind of, I am more adept than thou. I have more letters after my name. Oh, you're illegitimate. Oh, it's just, and okay, here's the way I put it. If you want to know the real history of the Golden Dawn, the women were actually running the order. Like Annie Horniman, who was the first initiated adept in the inner order, she funded the whole thing.
Wow.
And she and Moena, they were the artists who created all that color magic that we know as Golden Dawn magic. They created all of that. So the women were the ones in the temple running the order. And what were the men doing? Shit posting to each other in local periodicals. So it's honestly not much different than it is today, quite honestly. So so yeah, those guys, they were brilliant, they in what they were doing. A lot of the order's Enochian work was Westcott's work. We don't even know how much Woodman contributed. And for those who don't know, I'm talking about the three founders of the Golden Dawn. We don't even know what Woodman contributed because he passed away like a year after it all started. But those guys definitely, I mean, even Aleister Crowley had his moments of brilliance and was way ahead of his time on certain things. So I'm not dismissing them or even just trying to just shit talk them and
For sure. No, I think I'm glad we touched on it because I don't think it's something that gets brought up too much with, at least
it's not we idealize them. These are our mystical forefathers and stuff. But God, they were assholes and they were self-absorbed. And I once read I wish I could remember, and I wish someone watching this would remember and contact me because I can't find it. But there was someone famous. He was a famous author who was invited to join the Golden Dawn. Now, this was after the order had split. So it wasn't the Golden Dawn anymore. You had the Stella Macetina and you had the Alpha et Omega. Mathers was running the Alpha et Omega. Basically, Mathers kind of got kicked out of his own order. So if you want to know what kind of guy he was, so he and Crowley were in the French Temple and the Alpha et Omega. That was them. But Yeats and his crew, he was running William Butler Yeats was running the Stella Matutina. And this famous author was invited by Yeats to join the Stella Matutina, and he turned it down. And he left behind a description of his meeting with Yeats. Now, he certainly wouldn't have used this terminology at the time, obviously, but he described his meeting with Yeats as walking into a bar and sitting down to talk with a Harry Potter cosplayer. That was his impression of this man who wanted him to join the Golden Dawn, that this dude was a loser who was pretending to be a powerful. This is Yeats that he's talking to, you know? I mean, so we do really idolize these guys, but they were really at the time very kind of socially inept guys. You know, they weren't out there, you know, getting the ladies and stuff. That's why they were at the British Museum digging through old manuscripts and learning ancient secrets, you know. Yeah. So yeah, we idealized them, and they were brilliant, but they were human. And some of them, like Crowley, were just assholes, you know. And it just is what it is. We don't have to mythologize our origins, you know. Definitely. Just like today, no one in the Golden Dawn today thinks that we're we were founded by some secret adepts from Germany, you know, and all that Anna Sprengel stuff. And we don't believe that. It's just it's a quaint little legend that Westcott came up with, lied about, forged documents to try to prove. But okay, you know, it doesn't make the Golden Dawn system that the order itself as a group created.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it is a system that works. The failures you see, the egotistical people, the people who actually do harm to other people and are associated with a Golden Dawn name, those are the people who didn't do the system. Those are the people who skipped out on it, lied about it, bought fake diplomas. Be on this side, you know, these are real ones, not fake ones. You know, but the people who do that and skip out on the work and don't believe in it and don't take it seriously and don't do it, those are the ones who go out and, you know, give the system a bad name and give people like Peppers and Crowley, you know, a bad name. But it's not the system's fault.
Yeah, that's something that I actually have found just so refreshing in exploring just individuals within the Golden Dawn modern day. Guys like yourself, Ike Baker, you know, Chick, Tabitha, just a lot of really like humble, like kind-spirited, good people. Like it's not, you know, you don't, I mean, I'm sure within every organization, every group, there's always going to be like bad apples and stuff, but there's a lot of like just really amazing human beings, and I love it.
I consider myself so lucky. I mean, there are a lot of predatory organizations, and even if they're not predatory, there's a lot of organizations that, you know, aren't going to be here 5 years from now. You know what I'm saying? They're trying, but they're just not going to have, you know, much longevity. Mm-hmm. And again, even if they're trying, and even if they do have longevity, they may not have the proper training, or, you know, they may just be working from what's published and trying to cobble things together. And, you know, there's a lot of pitfalls to run into when, you know, and God bless everyone who's trying. You know, as a Gnostic priest, I say, if you're reaching for the light, you're one of the good guys. That's all that matters. Doesn't matter what religion it is. It doesn't matter what you call it, how you do it. Reach for the light, and we're on the same page, you know. Yeah. So any criticisms I give, understand they're technical, you know. Criticism's not essential, you know.
For sure.
But yeah, so there's a lot of pitfalls to trying to run your own order, and there's a lot more pitfalls to trying to join an order. And my God, the fact that my guardians put me at that time in Orlando, Florida, literally an hour and a half away from the Mother Temple of the Golden Dawn, and arranged things so that I could meet Chick, and that's where I was sent. You know, when my guardian angel said, because I was very unsure, and I don't want to join an order, all the politics, all the drama, I don't want to do that. And my guardian angel said, no, you really need to go and talk to Chick and Tabitha. So I did. And that was 25 years ago. No, that was 26 years ago, because that would have been maybe a year before I joined.
Damn.
I'll probably wait that long. But yeah, 25, 26 years, couple of decades. Enough for me to be as old as dirt at this point. But yeah, I've been there for a long. I met Chick and them, and I like you said, you know, good, kind-hearted people. you're not sure what you're going to meet, especially a famous guy like that, and part of me was stealing for this self-important pompous ass, and my God, man, he so long ago, but I knocked on their front door, and this little Italian guy answered the door and just, I got to show you this. Come here, come see this. Come look at this. Hey, you ever seen an actual, rose cross up close? Come look at this. And I spent this whole his house is a museum, by the way. And he just took me through the whole house, showing me everything like we were both 12-year-old boys. And he was just wanting to show me all this neat stuff. And I was like, oh, there was no ego there. There was no pomp and circumstance. There was no self-import. He wasn't playing a role. And I've met some very nice people, nice occultists, but they are always playing a role when you talk to them, and he wasn't doing any of that. It was just, right then I was like, I've got to be here.
That's awesome.
I have to be part of this. I knew.
Yeah.
So yeah, wonderful people. And I thank the higher powers that I ran into them instead of anything else I could have run into.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, I forget what we were talking about exactly, but something got brought up about like the underworld, and it made me want to ask, like, okay, so we've got like the underworld, hell, purgatory, Hades. Are these all sort of descriptions of the same thing, or are there differences? And like, what is kind of your assessment of these various depictions?
Well, to be fair, purgatory is more of a Catholic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall, I'd have to look back again, but I don't really recall encountering Valentinus himself really even talking about purgatory. I don't think it really played into the Gnostic cosmology. So yeah, purgatory, I do know it's not hell, and it's not anything to do with the underworld at all, and it's not heaven. It's just like this waiting room. I do know that it kind of popped up. It's not something that's like mentioned in the Bible or it was part of the original Christian view philosophy. It kind of popped up in Catholicism later on as, I think, kind of people were asking too many questions. And back then people loved to debate endlessly. I mean, they would debate how many angels could dance and have a pin, what part of Jesus, literally what percentage of Jesus was divine and which percentage was man. They would argue everything. So there were a lot of arguments over, well, if you haven't been baptized and, maybe you're a newborn baby and you die, a stillbirth, what happens then? Or, what happens under these weird circumstances? Or what happens under these weird circumstances? And so they finally came up with purgatory as a place. It's like, okay, you know what? If you haven't done anything that Mother Church says will send you to hell, but you also haven't done the things yet that Mother Church says will earn you your way into heaven, purgatory. It's a middle ground. And the idea was you were just supposed to sit there and repent. It's without the flames and the punishments of hell, but you're supposed to sit there and repent for however long it takes for you to earn your way into heaven. And then everyone in purgatory is supposed to eventually make it into heaven. And that's not really in the Gnostic cosmology, because Gnostic cosmology has the reincarnation and the concept of getting off the wheel. So it doesn't really, in fact, the going even back further than Valentinus, they felt that the teachings of the church and the idea of following certain rules to go to either heaven or hell was only for the Cainites. It was only for the descendants of Cain. So if you're a regular human being, a descendant of Cain, then you have to be good and follow the 10 Commandments, and maybe you'll get to go into a lower level of heaven where at least you won't be tortured or anything. But then as a Gnostic, they believed that they were the chosen ones. You were automatically saved. You could go murder 15 people if you want to, but as soon as you die, you're hopping off this wheel and going back to the pleroma. So yeah, it's pretty weird, these views that would pop up as people would ask questions and try to answer them as best they could from within their dogmas.
Yeah. Okay. So I have another question about that, but I want to go back before I forget, because I keep forgetting to ask you. So at the time, yeah, like at the time of, say it's something like Valentinianism, where was the development of like the common biblical canon, was it like fully developed at this point, or was it kind
Oh
of
yeah.
in? Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the earliest Gnostic sects are they arose after the Common Era.
Oh, okay.
You're talking like maybe like they probably had their heydays like in the first 300 years or so of the Common Era. But once the church came into power, real power, they started doing their best to wipe out the Gnostic sects. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the famous Council of Nicaea, which is where they named it the Catholic faith. That is where they set down their rules. This is what makes you one of us, and if you don't follow these rules, you're out.
Mhm.
They had a list of like unforgivable sins. Like these are the worst sins that you can commit. Satanism is on there, by the way. Worshiping Satan is on the list. It's like number 5 or 6 or something. I haven't looked in a while, but it was like number 5 or 6. Gnosticism was number 1.
Oh, wow.
So they started from, I mean, literally, the Council of Nicaea was the no Gnostics party. We were not invited. And they set as their number 1 rule that those guys are not allowed at our party anymore. And they started wiping us out. That's why Gnosticism moved steadily eastward until it found a kind of a hiding place, if you would say, in the Arabic countries. And that's where we got the Manichaean Gnostics from. And they existed all the way up until the Gulf War. And the Gulf War put an end to that.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so the reason I ask is because, so like with Gnostic sects, I think my thought around it is that they're not only drawing from texts and documents that are contained within the common biblical canon that was kind of determined by these various churches that came together and decided upon what was going to go in it, but yeah, they're drawing from a lot of additional sources. And is that kind of what comes to the difference and the division that had lended to these forms of dispersal within these Gnostic sects that kind of went off on to their own things? Or like, how do you see all that?
If you mean what I think you're saying, I don't think so. Like, it sounds like you're referring to the Apocrypha, like the
Sure,
stuff
yeah,
they
like where like the different
dug up in the Dead
codexes
Sea
or
Scrolls and all
Nag
that kind of stuff.
Hammadi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, Nag Hammadi was a little different because those were Gnostic texts, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls are just old biblical texts.
Okay.
Actually, I think the Dead Sea Scrolls were I can't believe their name is slipping my mind. It was the mystical sect. A lot of people think Jesus might have been hanging out with them. The Essenes. I think they were Essene texts. Yeah. But anyway, I'm splitting hairs on it. Yeah. I don't think the differences with the Gnostics are because of the Apocrypha. I actually think a lot of the Apocrypha, like the Nag Hammadi texts, are Gnostic texts. So I don't think it was the Apocrypha that influenced the differences. I just think it was their hardcore adoption of Platonism because Christianity, the mainstream Christianity, is generally considered to be Aristotelian.
Mm.
So they followed Aristotle and his view of the universe, whereas the Gnostics, they hitched their train to Plato and his view of the universe. So there's your diversion point. I mean, if you're looking at the philosophies from a historical standpoint. So they followed the Platonic view, which gave them the pleroma, and then that just gave rise to all of this, this whole drama with Sophia and the Christos and the Demiurge, and whether or not the Demiurge is Satan or if Satan is a separate entity. And like I said, this went on for a very long time, and there were many different Gnostic sects, the Rabilo Gnostics, and I mean, it just goes on and on. So you're going to get a lot of conflicting information from one sect to another, and you just kind of piece the drama together if you're trying to figure out the scripture and their philosophies. But I don't really see those philosophies like arising from the Apocrypha, because the Apocrypha is kind of its own thing. It's just alternative biblical texts that particular leaders didn't like, and so they would get rid of them. And that went on for a long time, all the way up to King James. So that's a long period of history of books that would just at one time be perfectly acceptable, and at another time now they're apocryphal, and it was just that just went on for a long time.
Yeah. And so okay, so you could say like maybe this Christ event had occurred, in the waters of the Neoplatonic worldview that was kind of dominant at the time, Hellenized Judaism, and there were these individuals or these groups that held to and included within their understandings Neoplatonic understandings, and then we had this formation of this other thing which became the maybe the Roman Catholic Church that got very
eventually.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to kind of like piece it all together and look at like the earliest kind of debates and versions of Christianities and like how
it's hard to piece together, and I'll tell you why. When the disciples, because that's where it started. It started in Egypt, where the first churches were founded by the disciples after the crucifixion. So you have these disciples who are starting in this general area, and they're spreading outward, and they're founding churches as they go. Okay. At that time, you got to think of it as a very decentralized religion. Okay, this apostle would come in. So now the apostle was a bishop. Okay, they were the first bishops. They were the first wandering bishops, by the way, and they would come in and they would teach the gospel, essentially, and they would found a church, and they would get it set up, and then they would ordain somebody to be the priest, and then they would move on to the next town. So you do this for a number of years, and you're going to end up with every single church that you have founded is going to be doing its own thing. They're going to have their own take on what you taught them. They're going to have their own unique things that the guy you left in charge added, or the congregation added, or things that they reinterpret. It's going to be, and they ended up with, every church had its own Bible. They all had different books in the Bible. So you go from one region to another, and you literally would have entirely different Bibles. So this is why, just for example, you're familiar with the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
And it before all the, beasts are crawling out of the sea and the sky is splitting open and all the fun stuff, it actually begins with John of Patmos writing 12 letters to the 12 churches of Asia. And that is the time period that I just described to you. He had to write letters to these churches. And the point of him writing these letters was to tell them all where they had all gone wrong. Well, you guys have started to believe this weird thing, so you need to stop that. And, and all those letters are in the book of Revelation. So, you can read them for yourself. But that's how the tradition was run. Each church would do its own thing, but every once in a while, someone would send out a letter going, hey, y'all, can we all get back under the same, flag here? And eventually that developed to the councils, like the Council of Nicaea. That was just one council like that, where every church would send their leaders, and they would get together, and they would have those arguments I described earlier. Well, exactly how did this Jesus thing work, and exactly how does this work? Well, the Bible says this, and how are we going to interpret that? And they would do that to keep themselves harmonized. Just every year, or probably wasn't once a year, but every once in a while they would get together and just try to get everyone on the same page. This is what we agree, and then they could all go back home and pick up where they left off. So the Council of Nicaea is special because that was where they finally made all the decisions, and exactly how they were going to interpret everything, what Christ meant, what it meant to be Christian, all of that. And they set it down, and they said, this is the universal rule book for Christianity. This is what we're going to follow from here on out. We're going to put an end to all of this, everyone going their own way thing. And universal, that's what Catholic means. They said, this is the Catholic faith. This is the universal faith. So, and like I said, that was where the Gnostics were excluded, because we are as old as the founding of the first churches. I mean, we have, just for a parallel example, you have Judaism, and then you have the Kabbalah. That is like the mystical practice of Judaism. And before that, you had Merkaba mysticism, but you always have the mainstream religion and then a mystical side as well. And Gnosticism was the mystical side of Christianity in the same way, up until the Council of Nicaea, where they kicked us out and that was where they created the Catholic religion. So anytime you're trying to look back into the these old founders of Christianity, you're going to find contradicting things and records that are just all over the place and scattered, and nothing is going to match up, because that was just kind of the nature of the system at the time. And then even once they finally all unified and said, now we're this one thing and we're calling ourselves the Catholics and we're electing a pope and we're going to do it this way, they still couldn't keep it together, because they got into a fight over the Nicene Creed that led to a schism that created the Orthodox Church. So the Orthodox Church came from the Catholics. They're not older than the Catholics. They're as old as the Catholics, but they split from the Catholics. And now you've got these two branches that you would have to study, and they say conflicting things. And of course, the Orthodox have their own leader. And it just goes on like that. And then you've got the Protestant things I won't get into. But if you're finding it hard to study, that's why.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating, because you have
That is
a lot of these modern institutions where it propagates these ideas, and you can come into conversations with people and they'll be like, well, you're looking at texts outside of this biblical canon, therefore you are not actually Christian, or you're not following our version or whatever. And I think that they use this line in Revelations that says something like nobody should add to this book or something, but then I'm always like, that's a line in that book of Revelations, that one book among the 66 books included in your particular canon, and it just drives me bonkers. But I don't know.
That's dogmatic BS, I tell you what, because there is, like I said, the whole thing with the Apocrypha, books being added, taken away, juggled around. I mean, it's been going on for so long. No one can say what. There is no the Bible, and no one can say what the Bible even is. Exactly. And it's just. And I always tell people, it is a collection of spiritual writings written by different people in different times, in different places, and who were practicing different religions.
Yeah.
So, I take it all. I take what's the Bible, I take the Apocrypha, I take, the Gnostic scriptures, all of it. And of course, the ancient scriptures, what the Babylonians and Sumerians left, what the Egyptians left, the Pertem Heru, the Book of the Dead, all of these sacred writings. Like I said, if you're reaching for the light, then you're part of this story,
Absolutely.
And saying, well, it's not in this particular book. Well, that just means you're part of a cult. Some human being decided which words should be in that book. And by the way, even what's in there now, like the Book of Deuteronomy, total forgery.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Entire book, one of the 5 books of the law, is a complete forgery.
Wow. I think I might recall coming across some people talking about that in some YouTube video I was watching a while back, but I never got to like validating or looking further. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was done by King Josiah, or by people hired by King Josiah, obviously.
Was it for like political reason, or what was it in regards to?
1,000% political reasons.
Oh, wow.
He decided to I love the way he did. I love the way he put the story together. He was going to have the temple renovated. What a nice man.
So sweet.
And while renovating the temple, they knocked down a wall. Hints of Rosicrucianism here, but this far predates that. Knocked down a wall, and in the wall they found a scroll that no one knew about. And the scroll had been written by Moses. A scroll that had made it from Moses's hand, who never entered the Holy Land, all the way through the period of the where they had the tabernacle and stuff, all the way through that period, I guess was given to Joshua to go into the Holy Land. Through the entire, it was somehow made it into the hands of David, then into the hands of Solomon, who then somehow accidentally put it into a wall of the temple and forgot about it. You see what I'm saying? It's a flimsy story. But he claimed they found this stupid scroll in the wall of the temple, and it was a lost book of the law. And it explained why God was so mad at Israel these days, because they had all these laws we've been breaking. And so, well, now we got to change our laws. And yeah, it was all it was absolutely political nonsense. And that Deuteronomy is where you find some of the stupidest stuff in the Old Testament. That's where you find thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it really says thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live.
Yeah.
But the word witch at that time was an indication of someone who worked with plants and stuff. They can make medicines too. But yeah, but that idea, just killing somebody for, that's in Deuteronomy, and a lot of harsh laws and really ridiculous stuff is in there. I tend to ignore Deuteronomy. So yeah, you're not safe even in the canon. It's all just stuff people put in there for their own political gain. You've got to read it all to get a real picture of what was happening,
Yeah. And it's so funny because a lot of these, like, they'll buy entirely they'll go all in on Deuteronomy, but then they'll completely dismiss things like the Book of Enoch or the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's just like, what? I don't know. But
yeah, the Book of Enoch especially gives them a real fit because it's mentioned in the canon.
Right. Yes.
I think it's in Jude. It says, as Enoch saith, and then it quotes the Book of Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been trying to keep the Book of Enoch out of canon for so long. And it keeps haunting them because you can't get rid of that quote in Jude. So it's all people are gonna be like, hey, what's this Book of Enoch? And they're gonna go look for it. And that's not what the people who put that canon together wanted. So that's why a lot, Merkava mysticism was based on it. It's important to the Golden Dawn. I mean, that book is like so foundational to Western mysticism. It's not even funny.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go back now to the underworld type of thing, because there was something that you mentioned in one of your interviews where you're talking about like ironsmith guilds and their association with like more underworld deities or something. Can you kind of like describe that a little bit?
Actually, this brings us back to what you were saying. Like, there's these old grimoires that deal with demons and such, and is there some difference between that and the satanic or demonolatry stuff? And I was saying that, yes, it was more priests doing this stuff. They weren't Satanists. They were devout Christians. But big thing they were interested in was Goetia. And some people say Goetia, but I don't think the Greek had that sh sound. I think it's just Goetia.
Goetia.
Yeah, but I could be wrong, and I'm sure someone will say I'm wrong.
I don't know. I pronounce things wrong all the time. I try my best.
It's fine. I'm just letting you know why I say Goetia, but it's fine however people want to pronounce it. It's like I say Enochian, but a lot of people say Enochian. It drives me crazy. But
I think I've said both.
I say Chick loves to pester me with that. He'll say Enochian. So hey, Aaron, are we gonna do some Enochian today? Shut up, Chick. But it's just an in joke. But well, they were very interested in Goetia, which is why there's a grimoire called the Goetia. But don't, and I'm saying this to your listeners, don't be confused between the book called the Goetia of Solomon and the tradition that is called Goetia, also called Goeti. And that goes back a very, very, very long way. And it's the key to understanding why priests and exorcists and devout Christians in the medieval era would have been focusing on books full of demons and Satan and things like that. And it's because of Goetia. And Goetia, like you said, it goes back to the iron guilds that formed just as the Iron Age really got cooking. So this is the time when most of your armies were going out into battle with brass shields and swords and armor. And these supermen were showing up on the scene with these magical weapons that could just tear through their swords and shields and armor like they were paper. And that like 10 men could decimate an entire regiment of people with these super weapons. So these were, and even if someone dropped one of these weapons on the battlefield and you went to pick it up, you'd barely even be able to lift it. So the men carrying these weapons had to be superhuman. Some were even called the sons of Hercules. They assumed they were demigods. And what they had were obviously iron weapons. No one had seen that before. Iron weapons were at that time weapons of mass destruction. So they were hotly guarded secrets. So very, very quickly, the secrets of how to well, I'm going to say mine iron, but that came later. The original iron materials that we worked with came from fallen stars. So you can imagine a star falls to Earth, and this dude goes out, collects it, and turns it into a sword. And then he gives that sword to your greatest warrior, and your greatest warrior goes out and just decimates the enemy with that sword. So obviously that sword is going to become legendary. One of the earliest groups of people that were metalsmiths like that, and they were world famous for being wizards because they could make these magical weapons and armor, were called the Calibes. And I have a very strong suspicion that Excalibur was from the Calibes.
Wow.
It was a super weapon at the time. So anyone who could bear that sword would be king of England. So that's how famous the Calibes were. And that's how famous their weaponry was. So these are your iron guilds. Now, remember, this is a period of time when government and religion are not two separate things at all. So if you're going into this guild, which is like going into the military, you know, to become, you know, like you're going to join the military and make atomic bombs, basically, by joining, you know, you're going to join this guild and learn how to turn this star metal into super weapons. So you don't just walk in, you have to be initiated. You have to become part of their religion and you have to worship their gods. And so these guilds, these mystery cults, became the very first Greek mystery cults. Later on, after the Olympian cults rose, because we're talking about a period so long ago, they aren't worshiping Zeus or any of the Olympian gods yet. So they're still worshiping the Telkines, Vulcan, the Kabiri, very old underworld fire deities is who these guys worshipped. So, and I forget why I went on that tangent, but oh no, I do know why I went on that tangent. Give me just 1 second here.
No worries. Love it.
So yeah, and I can talk about this forever because this is one of my favorite subjects. Jake Stratton Kent introduced me to all this, and it just blew my mind. So bless him, bless his soul for that, and rest in peace. But the reason I brought up the Olympians is because later on, once the Olympic cults arose, that is where what we know as the Greek mysteries were founded. The ones where you would actually be taken down into a cave, and it had to do with Persephone and Hades and the changing of the seasons and all that. Those Greek mysteries are what evolved into later the chivalric orders and masonry and all these secret societies, you know, and the orders that claim they have ancient wisdom going all the way back. Well, they're talking about going back to they were called the Eleusinian mysteries.
Oh, yes.
And there were some other Greek mystery cults as well, like the Samothracians and stuff. But those cults were basically ripoffs of what the Calibes were doing. Those mystery cults, and that's why those Greek mystery cults are so focused on the underworld, because the guilds that were making the iron tools were very focused on, they worshiped Vulcan, who's the god of the forge. And like I said, they worship the Telkines and the Kabiri, all fire entities, all beings that lived underground. And especially once they learned how to mine iron, now they were really an underground cult. So all their gods and everything were always associated with the underworld. So they were experts in underworld deities. So branching out from there, you have the Goan. Goan is literally the regional name for shaman. It's just the ancient Greek word for shaman.
Mm-hmm.
And the Goan were also worshipped. They were basically part of the same people. They were also worshipers of these underworld entities, and they were specifically famous for their funerals. They would actually come to your funeral. You could hire them, or I guess if he was your local shaman, that was his duty to come to your funeral. Either way, but you could get him to come to your funeral, and he would sit there, or she. They would sit there and just wail and scream and cry, pull out their hair, rip their clothes, and toss themselves over your coffin and go, why? Even though they didn't know you.
Wow.
Because that was actually a ritual they were doing. There was ritualized mourning. You actually, go ahead.
Is there any relation to the Goan and Goetia? Is that any?
That's where I'm coming from, because the reason they had the name Goan is because the word goes means to wail. It's the ancient Greek word to wail. And they got that name because of their expertise at the funerals, wailing. So you have these people who have these deep traditions. the traditions dealing with the underworld that were ancient when the Greek mysteries, when the Eleusinian mysteries were first founded, those were already considered ancient mysteries. Okay. So this tradition of working with underworld entities continued through history and finally manifested in medieval Europe in the what's known as the black magic grimoires, the grimoires that deal with demons and Satan and underworld entities. So that's why one of those grimoires is called the Goetia, because by the time that book was written, the word Goety had stopped meaning to wail, and it had started to mean witchcraft.
Wow.
So the author of the Goetia was naming his book Witchcraft, but he wanted to use a Greek term for it. And yeah, so all these guys that were writing these grimoires dealing with demons, they weren't worshiping Satan. They were simply practicing a very, very ancient tradition of going, it's called the harrowing of hell. There's even grimoires called the harrowing of hell. And in their view, they were doing what Jesus did when he went into the tomb and he was there for 3 days. There's a tradition that says he went down into hell during those 3 days. And he said a lot of things right that were wrong down there when he was down there. And he like blasted open doorways and knocked over bridges. And it's a pretty neat story. And then he took him and a bunch of souls he rescued. When he ascended, he took them with him. So these people that were practicing this grimoire tradition, this Solomonic grimoire tradition, they felt they were doing the same. They wanted to open the gates of hell and get the wisdom and knowledge that was there, and basically follow in Jesus's footsteps.
Man, that's wild.
Just, you know, and it goes back, you know, because it's not a form of Satanism, it's a form of shamanism, just like the ancient Goan, and just like like the Native American shaman who will, or I should say medicine man. I know there's contention over the word shaman, but who will go into the underworld to rescue your spirit and bring it back if you're sick. It's exactly what they did. Another Greek tradition that was connected is his name is slipping my mind, and it often does. I don't know why it's so slippery to me, but it's the Greek mythology of the guy who went down into the underworld to rescue his wife, and he played the lyre beautifully. Drat, I'm gonna feel so dumb. No. He's the one that traveled on the sea. Now, this was he was a beautiful poet, and he went down into the underworld to rescue his wife, and Hades gave him his wife because he played the lyre so beautifully it made Persephone cry. And Hades said, your wife can come back, but she'll be behind you, but you can't turn around and look. And so he goes back up the cavern that's going to lead him back out of the underworld, and he thinks he can hear her behind him, but he's not sure, and he's wondering if Hades just made a fool of him or what's going on. And he was literally within just a few feet of the opening of the cave, and he turned around and looked, and there was his wife, and she vaporized because he looked. And there was a whole religious tradition based on that myth. There were followers of that figure who wanted to take that same trip into the underworld that he did to rescue souls and bring them out. So this concept, this shamanic concept, is worldwide and goes back a very long way. But that's another example of why they had this focus on the underworld. You know, you would think devout Christians, it would just be Jesus and nothing else. But no, they knew. They looked back into the ancient Greek wisdom, and they knew about the Eleusinian mysteries. They knew about the mysteries and the wisdom that was associated with the underworld. But because of their Christian doctrine, the underworld was now hell. And instead of Hades, it was Satan. So in a way, they were kind of braving going into what they felt was a lion's den to rescue the treasure, just like the knight getting the treasure out of the dragon's cave. That's how they saw themselves, was rescuing treasure.
And so, okay, so in terms of the Goetia, I don't know if this is related, but there's something that you had mentioned on one of the conversation I was listening to, the Hygromantia. I think you said it was like the OG Key of Solomon or something like that. What is this?
Oh yeah, big time.
What is this Hygromantia?
Yeah, it is just as you said. It's the OG Key of Solomon. Basically, the Solomonic tradition, if we're tracing it through history, it actually came into Europe from Byzantium. So it traveled up into Europe. And the hygromantia is I'm not even sure why they call it the hygromantia. I mean, I think it's in the title somewhere, but you remember they had really long titles. But it's just as easy to call it, a Key of Solomon or the Key of Solomon, because it's the originator of a lot of the different manuscripts that would circulate around calling themselves the Key of Solomon. And it came up from the Byzantium tradition attached to a copy of the Testament of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually why, because if you look at the hygromantia, it's not really Solomon centric. It's just kind of telling you about all these, talismans and, consecrations. And it's kind of a manual. It's a user's manual. That's what grimoire means. It's a grammar book. It's a beginner's book. So it has all the instructions. But because it came attached or appended to the Testament of Solomon, the two got related together.
Okay.
There's also a weird theory going on right now, and I have someone who's written an article that I'm going to publish in my upcoming edition of the Occult Calendar. He found an actual man named Solomon in Byzantium, who may have been the original Solomon that the older Keys of Solomon are referring to.
Ooh, wow!
Like his name was Solomon. Like he has no relation to the king. He's just some dude who lived down there, but he was a magician, and he had a school, and he had students, and he actually wrote things down, and his students published things, and apparently the hygromantia comes from that source. So the biblical king may have been kind of, like I said, with the Testament of Solomon being there, it may have just gotten conflated with what's in that book, and the real Solomon might have just been a dude named Saul.
Wow.
And I don't even know if I agree with that theory. There are some people that really disagree with that theory, with that interpretation of the history. I'm kind of up in the air on it. I think we need more info.
Yeah,
but
it seems really worth exploring, though. That's really
It's
interesting.
definitely worth, because this guy, he's traced some lineages, specific texts that he knows were written by disciples of this guy named Master Solomon.
Wow.
So it's a little hard to just brush it off. That's why I'm willing to publish it, because I think it deserves some attention. It could be groundbreaking. But because of the Europeans' fascination with Arabic magic, and the Arabics were like the Persians and such were writing a lot of astrology magic manuals and talisman manuals and stuff. And in the Arabic nations, Solomon was a Marvel superhero. I mean, like literally, there were just stories. I mean, if they had comic books, you could have gone and bought them. I mean, it was that kind of a superhero. And legends of King Solomon from that kind of trickled over into Europe. And I think they kind of met up with this hygromantia book being attached to the Testament of Solomon. And it all just went as one package. And
Wow.
that's literally the foundation of what we call the Solomonic tradition.
That's so interesting. Okay, and then so with the goins that we were talking about, do they have a practice of exorcism within their sort of traditions and things like this?
Well, the thing is, they didn't leave written records. It's almost like with the Druids. We know they existed. And a lot like Jake Kent, he wrote like the definitive work on them, and I highly recommend it. It's called the Christos Sophia series. And he actually would take like a lot of the old legends and would find things like strands in those. Just for an example, one of the main what's the right word to use here? Not a plot point, a plot device. He uses a plot device through Christos Sophia. It's not just chapter 1 is this chapter. He actually takes you on a journey, literally on the Argo with Jason and the Argonauts. And the reason, that he does this because of what I said. He uses these legends, and he's following threads in the legends. And at one point in the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, like one of the oldest versions of that legend, there is talk of him stopping before he got on his ship. Him and the Argonauts, before they would get on their ship, they had to meet these mysterious people who took them down into a cave and blessed them and consecrated them, literally initiated them into the cult of this fire deity. And it was for the purpose of protection. And it was stated in that story that this was just common. Like if you were going to get all your buddies together and go on a sailing expedition, you didn't leave until you saw these guys and got their protection. So he looked into that and he found out that, yeah, because that thread led to the Goan. That was the Goan that Jason met. And they are the ones that had those rituals. But we don't know what those rituals were. We know they took people down into the caves and initiated them, but we don't know what those rituals looked like. And he does that throughout the book. Yeah, he'll just take different things that happened to Jason, and he pulls in a lot of other mythology and stuff too. But with this one plot device, he'll just say, these different things, different encounters that Jason had, and he would just explore them and find what historical precedents they had and where that particular legend would have come from. And he's the one that uncovered all this stuff about the Goan and who they were and the ridiculously massive impact they had on Western culture, but especially Western esotericism, the mystery traditions and occultism and stuff. So much of what we do dates back to them.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to ask you about like possessions. So like forms of possession, or like in the true sense of the word, like do you see it that humans can allow themselves to become possessed by malevolent spirits or benevolent, like say like Christ or the Christos? Would that be considered a form of like divine possession in a sense, or how do you see that?
Well, like you said, there's different kind of areas to discuss in that. If you look at something like Abramelin, the book of Abramelin, it's a 6-month. I'm saying this in case you don't know, or your listeners. It's a 6 or 18-month. There's 2 versions. 6 or 18-month ritual that you undergo to permanently bond with your guardian angel. So it does end with a permanent ritual possession. There's similar things in other cultures as well, like in the African traditional religions. If you're sainted, that means they have put your orisha, your guardian, to your head, and you are now a priest of that tradition, a vessel for that orisha. Same thing happens to monks, when they go, and that's why they shave the top of their head. It's to let that Holy Spirit in and bond with it permanently. So there are deeply religious, permanent ritual possessions that still go on today. And yes, more temporary ones are also common. I've been mounted and ridden by archangels before. And again, going into the ATRs, I've seen people mounted by Orisha and Loa and stuff like that, and it's pretty interesting. I didn't actually see it like by attending one of their religious ceremonies. I saw it because I'm a drummer, and I'm a drummer in Florida. So I've had many times when I've been, just at a big drum gathering, and there's a lot of Latino people around me, and a lot of practitioners of the tradition, and they have specific drum beats for their Orisha. And I never learned them. I don't know them. I don't even recognize them when I hear them, but they're playing them when some of them will start falling out or they'll just jump up and start leaping around and acting, and that's because they've been mounted. So that happens. And these are examples of things that are like more controlled, and, like if you're playing the drum beat and you're doing a ritual, or doing Abramelin, or any of these examples I've given are examples of either permanent, like I said, in some cases, or temporary possession by spiritual entities. So it absolutely is a real thing. Yeah. As far as malevolent entities go, it's really rare. Like a person being possessed, I think I might have seen maybe once, and that's actually not true. It was more than once, but it was one person, and they kind of tended to have this this personality that just opened them up to that kind of thing. So yeah, that person actually had an exorcism performed on them once. I wasn't present for it. I happened to be at work at the time it went down. It was spontaneous, but it was my wife and a friend of ours who was living with us at the time, who was also, actually all of us were members of the Golden Dawn. But my wife was there, and our other roommate, and the girl this was happening to. And apparently they performed an exorcism right there on her. Wow. In the middle of the night while I was at work. I didn't hear about it, so I came home. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, it can happen, and it's more common to run into places that are possessed or haunted. And I've run into countless. I've got tons of ghost stories and stuff from days when I used to work overnights, and I'd go to different sites and stuff. Old buildings and stuff. Yeah, I've seen a thing or three on that count, on that.
Yeah.
In that way. But it's very rare to see a person get possessed. And it does seem to be often people that are kind of damaged in a way that kind of makes them susceptible to it. But it's not like in the movies. It's not like every spirit out there wants your soul or when you look far enough back, people tend to kind of think Catholics invented exorcism. They didn't. The oldest exorcism in records that we have are the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and they kind of originated the arts of exorcism as we know them. The Catholics were learning from them, and then everyone else has kind of learned from the Catholics. I actually don't really agree with the Catholic method, simply because it always views the possessing spirit as an enemy to be fought. And I don't agree with going into battle with a spirit that's possessing someone. There are ways to do it. And you can even go into YouTube right now and look up exorcisms, but not Catholic ones. Look at exorcisms that are done in like South America, like in like Candomblé and Santeria and those traditions. And it's very different. Their exorcisms are entirely different. There's no violence, yelling, screaming, puking. All that stuff doesn't happen. It's more just communicating with the spirit. And there are ways that you can actually get the spirit to leave willingly without a fight. But if you go in and address the spirit as an enemy from the beginning, then it will oblige and you'll have a fight. So that's why I don't really dig the Catholic method.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, the individual I'd mentioned earlier, Douglas Gabriel, I guess he was an exorcist, and his take on it was that an individual really has to like allow these spirits or entities in at some point for them to really take a hold of oneself. At least that's what his take was. I don't know if that's
well, it's in some cases. I don't think everyone is just allowing it, but that doesn't mean that you don't have traumas and complexes and things that kind of make you susceptible to it anyway. Like you're not consciously thinking, hey, I'd like to get possessed.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense in another sense though. 1 second. And this is something I tell any client that comes to me and says that they're possessed, their house is haunted, they've been cursed. That's a big one. People come to me and say they've been cursed. And I always warn them, I tell them that the hardest part of my job when it comes to breaking curses or banishing spirits is that once that work is done, talking the client out of calling the entity back. More often than not, a person who comes to you and says, I'm experiencing these things. And it's not just that. This goes into all aspects of life. People do this over their personal injuries, their pains, the diseases they've had, hardships they've suffered. Their drama and their suffering becomes their identity. So in a lot of cases, unfortunately, most cases, a person who comes to you and says, oh, I'm experiencing all this stuff, you can banish the spirit or you can break the curse, but their identity is that thing they're going through. That's the thing they talk about with their friends, this horrible thing they're going through. It's the thing that makes their friends go, oh, poor baby, and if you take that away from them, and like I said, this works in all aspects. Like, someone who has relationship drama all the time, and if anything ever happens to clear that drama up, they get right back out there and drum it back up because it's their identity. They don't know how to live without it. It's almost like a drug. They don't know how to live without that drug. So yeah, you'll break the curse or you'll banish the spirit, but more often than not, they're going to call it right back. So most of my job is somehow talking them or browbeating them into not engaging that thing. Once I've gotten rid of it, don't engage it anymore. If you have a curse and I break that curse for you, the next time you stub your toe, don't start wailing to the heavens if the curse is back, because it just brings it back, And I think that might be even where the other person you're interviewing was coming from, was that, yeah, they invite it, they call it back over and over and over again. So I've even had to cut ties with clients. I say, I will not sit here and steal your money, because I'm going to fix this for you, and then you're going to come back and tell me that I didn't fix it, and I do it again,
Yeah.
and pay me more. And that's not why I do this, and
Yeah,
I'll tell them, this is not happening to you, this is you. And until you make these changes, you don't come back to me when you've made these changes, because I'm not just going to keep siphoning,
yeah.
consult fees.
I would imagine it'd be very tough. I mean, you're dealing with complex human psychology as well, and
Absolutely.
trying to overwrite these like really ingrained embedded patterns that somebody's so used to cycling through. I could imagine how difficult that would be and what that would entail, and things that they might not even on a subconscious level be aware are occurring due to their past or their histories.
There's been more than one client where I've told them, I'm a spiritual counselor, but if we hit a certain point that you need a real counselor, a licensed counselor, I have referred people. Well, I say referred, I don't know a counselor that I refer them to, but I've told them, find a counselor that works for you, that you feel comfortable with, because you can get to a point where they're, a licensed counselor, and I've undergone it. It was actually fairly brief. Unfortunately, he passed away, but I started going through counseling sessions with him, and it was fascinating to see how he worked. And they know exercises, tricks, little things you can do to make changes in your brain that I don't know. I haven't studied. I might someday and even get certified, but right now I haven't. So I have no shame in referring someone to a real counselor, a real therapist, and say, this is beyond just a spiritual issue. You need to fix these traumas, and you need someone who knows what they're doing guiding you through that, and not just some occultist you found online. You know what I'm saying? So, it often is a type, kind of, but I say that I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed, because I've had also instances where like someone will email me and need to set up a consult, and they'll tell me what the problem is, and I'm like, well, this person's nuts. I'm gonna have to tell this person to go seek, not just therapy, but like medication. I think this is insane. But then I talk to them and I hear their story, and they're actually not insane. It's just the way they came across. So there are times, you got to take each case, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm just saying, oh, everyone who comes to me with these problems is a nut job, because I'm surprised too, and sometimes people suffer real issues, and with them I really do my best to help them, and then, like I say, talk them out of calling it back, whatever it is.
For sure. Yeah, it seems like a real art of kind of like instigating those connections to occur naturally within someone. And I guess I wonder what you think about this. I kind of think about it even in like micro forms or micro levels. I don't know if you would agree or not, but like even little things, just like with ideas in life, like maybe I have this habit of doing this thing that I know is bad for me, like that. Maybe that's like a micro form of possession on some level that I'm kind of like allowing. You know what I mean? Do you see it like on those micro levels like that, or would you consider it like a totally different thing?
That's hard to say. You get into a real nebulous area. I had my guardian angel once tell me that every thought that goes through your head is a spirit.
Mm.
So you could build on that, and you could say that all addictions are actually demons that are on your back, and you can you can also build on that at the point of uselessness too. You get to the point of just blaming everything in your life on some spirit or something, and abdicating responsibility. But so, without getting real nitpicky on that kind of thing, there is something we do in the Golden Dawn. And Donald Michael Craig teaches it in his very popular book, Modern Magic. He called it the IOB technique. That's not what it was called in the Golden Dawn, but he called it identify, objectify, banish. It's a very useful technique. It's very simple. The basic Golden Dawn ritual, which is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. And the idea was you could take any habit or complex or neuroses that you're dealing with, and you can personify it. They have a thing in the Golden Dawn called talismanic imaging. So you could actually create a picture of this spirit, but every part of the picture actually indicates something, means something. Like Catholic icons, you'll see the saint, but what he's wearing means something. What he's holding in his hands means something. It's that kind of, it's talismanic. And once you create this image of what you don't like about yourself, and you can give it a name. So, if you're addicted to cigarettes, you can make this gnarly little cigarette demon, and you could call him, Cigarette the demon or something. You know what I'm saying? So the idea, and that's the identify is identifying what you want to fix, and then objectifying it is putting it into the spirit and pretend, even if you don't believe it, pretend it's a demon that's possessing you. And then the banished part is using visualization. You actually perform that, you visualize the entity standing in front of you, and then you push it back. And then you perform the banishing ritual around yourself with that entity on the outside of the circle. So you're literally banishing that spirit away, and you just keep doing that as a regular practice. And the idea is that should begin to loosen that. Let's say it's the cigarette addiction. It should start to loosen. You should start feeling yourself not wanting that damn cigarette anymore, and eventually, if it works for you, you should get to where you just don't want the cigarette anymore. You realize you've gone maybe a day or two and you haven't even thought of cigarettes,
Yeah.
And it's a very useful technique. And I have used it a time or two in my life. So yeah, I can vouch for it.
I love that. All right. Okay. So there was something about thaumaturgy to theurgy or vice versa that you were talking about. I don't know if it was like in the order in which it is to be done, or does that ring a bell to you? Do you remember talking about on some interview you did?
Not specifically. I can see those words coming up, but I don't think
like in terms of the order, like, yeah, I don't remember what it was, but I'm
not sure.
Because
I would say that. Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking about, I think it was in Agrippa or something. He was saying like thaumaturgy first, and then comes theurgy. And I don't know if it was like a debated thing between whether theurgy is to come first, or I don't know, something like that.
I'm not sure if Agrippa mentions that specifically, but I can tell you that theurgy means God working. And thaumaturgy is practical magic. So, if you think of the theurgic systems, which are usually very hermetic, so they're usually dealing with Hermes or Apollo, or and there's a lot of rituals, like they'll bond the god to an object and make offerings to that god, and all sorts of purification rituals and rituals meant to harmonize you with that god. And we kind of adopt that word theurgy now, especially since the Golden Dawn, for any system that is intended to elevate you, initiate you, well, as the Golden Dawn says, make you more than human. Okay. So that's considered theurgy. And that should come first before thaumaturgy, because then thaumaturgy is the practical work, where you would actually make talismans and
I think that was what my question was going to be about. And then I don't know if I'm accurate on my perception on Agrippa speaking to thaumaturgy coming first, so maybe I could be wrong on that, but yeah, I was just.
He might have. I mean, I've read all 3 books from cover to cover, of course, but it's been years, so, and it's a dense work.
I haven't, so I can't really speak with any confidence.
Yeah, well, with Agrippa is just like I said, it's so dense, you never know if what you read was in Agrippa or not.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, he probably mentioned everything. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to just ask, how are you on time? I still have some questions I would love to get to, but I don't want to.
I'm good if you are.
Cool. Okay. So
as long as we don't go too long for your show.
You what?
As long as we don't go too long for the time block you have for your show.
There's no such thing.
Yeah, see, so that we're good.
All right. I'm interested and curious about your experience with the reception of spirit communication, and how, like, do you experience like a voice or a vision, or is it both? Are there is this like things with eyes closed, eyes opened? Is it like things are being, are they being manifest in terms of visions within your earthly a sphere as well, or is this in a vision of a trance state, or just any of like how spirit communications for you personally have kind of come into their manifestations, and how you would describe their reception? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always this is something I teach to my students actually, is that we all have more than five senses. And I'm not talking about the mystical sixth sense. I mean, just according to science and physiology, you've got a sense of balance, you've got a sense for hunger, you've got senses for pain and pleasure, you've got hundreds of senses all operating in your body right now to keep you upright and know what's in your environment. And whenever you're working with spirit communication, always remember that they do not have physical bodies. They're not sending air across vocal cords and through over a tongue and through lips in order to make sounds that can travel to the across the air and vibrate your eardrum. They communicate with what today we would call telepathy. It's just a direct message from them right onto your brain. And Agrippa does talk about that, by the way. Because of this, there are two things that are true. Number one, and this is a big one to remember, the spirit cannot tell you anything, cannot say anything to you that you don't already have symbols in your brain to say it with. This is why it's so important for new students to learn all of their correspondences and, all the colors and the sounds, and, because when the visions come, when the messages come, you have to be able to pinpoint where they're coming from. And when the entities are talking to you, they need all of those symbols and correspondences to put the message together in your head. I say it's like, imagine a quantum physicist attempting to explain quantum physics to a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
That's what it's like when they have the mysteries of the universe, but our little monkey brains only have so much language in it to communicate with, and some have more than others. When we realized my wife was a natural scryer and she was going to be my Edward Kelly, we realized very quickly that she didn't have the symbols in her head to have reliable visions that we could then record and get something out of. Her brain kept filling in gaps with knowledge it already had, and nothing was making sense. So that's why she joined the Golden Dawn. That's why she started practicing and learning Hermetic magic and joined the Golden Dawn. And now she can get the visions, and she knows exactly what message is coming through and how to relay it. The other thing to remember about that is going back to the senses. Because they're not talking through words, they're talking through impressions. Any combination of the hundreds of senses in your body can come into play. So one person might see the entities, like my wife can see them like plain as day, like they're really in the room with her. Some people might hear them. I'm a little more wired to hear them. Also, I can sometimes smell them. I'll get whiffs of things. That's common. You may be performing an evocation and suddenly get weird tastes in your mouth, like metallic tastes or other weird tastes in your mouth. You could get dizzy, you could suddenly be hungry, you could suddenly be sexually aroused. All of these senses can come into play to let you know that this spirit is present and trying to communicate with you. And it will be because of that, it will be different for everyone. Yeah. So, like my wife can sit there and just talk to these guys like they're sitting in the room. I can't do that.
Wow. That's amazing.
They communicate to me more through feeling. I can feel them in the room, and they will give me messages that just come to me like flashes of inspiration in my mind. I don't often hear voices. Sometimes I'll hear music or other sounds that let me know they're there. Every once in a while, I'll hear a voice. So yeah, you see the difference between me and my wife right there. And other people also have different experiences and different processes that their brains use to receive the information and interpret it.
Yeah, that's actually very informative. And I think it might relate to my next question. Because you'd mentioned like the importance about building one's sort of symbolic prerequisite knowledge base. And so this may relate. Do you yourself have any recommendations in regard to, individuals that are interested in pursuing something like Enochian, Enochian? I forget the
Either one.
Okay.
There's good arguments for both, so don't worry about it.
All right. Do you feel like someone should attain prerequisite prior knowledge? Like my good friend Ike Baker, who you've communicated with, he himself, he kind of errs on the side of caution personally when it comes to these sort of things, and advises kind of staying away from looking at the system without proper initiatic training for kind of the purpose of like inculcating protective measures, sort of risking maybe potential negative manifestations that might occur and whatnot. And so from an outside perspective, wanting to be safe and cautious, like myself, someone who's inexperienced, I trust his assessment, but I'm curious, like you yourself, what you personally feel in regards to, like, if someone were to, try to engage with these subject matters without being involved in any particular like supportive group setting, like, do you recommend that? Do you feel like it's a bad idea? What would you say, like, to things along those lines?
You mean for Enochian magic specifically?
Yeah, specifically.
Because I don't really know of any. I mean, I know there are some working groups that try to focus on just Enochian magic, but then again, there's a difference between de-purist magic and what I call the neo-Enochian system, which is basically the Golden Dawn's system of Enochian magic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's real hard for me to take a real moral stance on that, at least of that sort, because when I was a young occultist, I was a hot-headed, idiot. If you showed me a portal, I'd dive through it head first, So and I'm not even joking.
Man.
What fascinated me with Enochian, I was in Denver at the time. I had just met my first group of occultists. I'd been the only one I knew for years, and one of them had an Enochian book. It was a terrible Enochian book. It was by the Schulers. It was horrible, but he had it, and I didn't know what it was. And he handed me the book, and I opened it, I looked in it, and it just had all these weird alien words and stuff in it, right? And I'm like, what in the hell is this? And he goes, have you ever heard of, like a wizard doing a spell but accidentally mispronouncing just one word, and then his head explodes, or demons, rush out and tear him apart or something? And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, this is where that's from. I was like, no way. And right there, and I tell you, that was the moment I knew I was going to learn everything I could learn about that system of magic. So yeah, it would be wrong of me to say, well, no, you should go get initiated because I didn't, I dove right in. But is it dangerous? Yeah. I mean, but it's all dangerous. The grimoires are dangerous. And I don't just mean the demons. Archangels are dangerous. And definitely, the Enochian system, that's dealing with archangels, and they're dangerous. None of it's safe. But as to like having prior knowledge going in, that's always preferable. Like, for example, I've got 3 books on Enochian now, but the first 2 that I wrote, it was actually 1 book, but it was so long I had to split it into 2. And the first book is a complete exploration of what Dee was doing, what sources he was drawing from, and what his intentions were. Because I think having that background knowledge is vastly important to understanding the material he left. And if you're going to adopt that material and try to contact those angels, you need to know what he was doing and what he was trying to accomplish. So I think just grabbing an Enochian book and diving in is much less preferable and more dangerous than starting and learning that context. And yeah, knowledge is power. You need as much knowledge and information packed into your head as possible when you start communicating with these spiritual entities, because the more you have, the more they can say and the more sense it'll make. And when you don't have that and you just go in with what's in your own head, that's how we get people who do terrible things in the name of various gods, and perceive their god as being just as petty and messed up as they are. And I mean, that's one really bad, because what they're doing at that point is they're not talking to the deity or the spirit or the angel, they're talking to themselves. So yeah, the more knowledge you have, the better off you're going to be in that sense.
Yeah. And so you're more of a deep purist yourself, it seems. I'm wondering, in your view about maybe potential like D's mistakes, if any? Like I think I had heard an individual draw attention to something like, I think he was saying like the princes and kings being the same planet, or some minute like things like along these lines. I don't know. Do you see that D did have some mistakes that you yourself recognize? Maybe this is some stuff that you cover in your works. I'm kind of ignorant about it.
Yeah, it's only minor. I mean, like the seal of truth. I say it's the seal of the true God is what it's really called, but people call it the seal of truth. There are some mistakes in what D left on what the numbering and the lettering of the circumference should be. And if you know the there's actually a pattern that you have to decode various names out of the circumference, and he gives that pattern in his journals. And if you follow that pattern, you can find where he wrote the wrong numbers down. And like in my books, I've corrected those. I've got the correct numbers on the seal of the true God that I present in my work. But it's only little stuff. Well, there was another bigger one, and I think you mentioned it in the Heptarchia system, which is the planetary magic system that he recorded.
Mhm.
There is a list of kings and princes and what their offices are, what their powers are. And he really borked that up. I mean, he got them all switched around, and like a couple of them were left blank. But fortunately, he did realize his mistakes. I don't know why he didn't go back in the journals and fix where he wrote them down incorrectly. But if you read forward in his journals, he makes marginal notations in later entries where he recognizes those mistakes and corrects them.
Ah, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look in like my Essential Enochian Dictionary, or why did I say that? Essential Enochian Grimoire. I have the powers of the kings and princes restored in that book. I put all of his corrections back in there. But so it's just little stuff like that, like copying errors or cases like that, where he would receive one thing and write it down, but then later on an angel would say, no, you got that wrong, you need to fix that. And he might note it there, but if someone comes along and reads his journal, they may see the earlier entry and adopt that without ever knowing that it was corrected later. And so that's where a lot of mistakes have crept into the Enochian system.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is obviously a gigantic area of passion and interest for you, and it seems like your books have really influenced a lot of people and like informed and lent a great deal to this whole subject.
Hope so.
And so I wonder, like, is this any point of contention with, say, your Golden Dawn work, as far as the deep purist stuff comes up against? Maybe is it that they do things a little different within their system, and does it take away from anything? Does it complement? Do you view it as any conflict, or like how do you look at that?
Yeah, there's no real conflict. They're two different traditions. There were two versions of what's called the Great Table. And as far as the Golden Dawn is concerned, the John Dee's Great Table is the heart and soul of their Enochian system. In the deep purist stuff, it's just kind of a side thing. But in G's journals, he wrote two versions of it. He actually wrote several, but there's two that are important to what we're talking about here. And the second one was called the Reformed Table of Raphael. And there's a marginal notation by that how Edward Kelly had been alone in his room when Raphael appeared to him and said, you need to rearrange the Great Table in this way. And so Kelly came in, they rearranged it, and the footnote said, the marginal notation says, they rejoiced because it solved a great doubt.
Mm.
So the founders of the Golden Dawn read Dee's journals, and they saw that, and they went, okay, well, clearly Dee, this is a correction of the Great Table. This is the Reformed Table of Raphael. So they adopted that, the Reformed Table of Raphael, and it became the basis of what the Golden Dawn does. Now here's the rub. And I'm not saying this to disparage the Golden Dawn system, but that Reformed Table of Raphael was entirely linked to the wife swapping incident between Dee and Kelly and their wives.
Mm.
Basically, Kelly had received the message from an angel that they needed to swap wives. Dee said, yeah, we're not doing that unless God himself says it's okay. So God sends a message, but it's encrypted. And they try to decrypt it, but because it said number all the message was number all the cells in the great table, and there's letters in every cell. And the numbers in this message, replace them with letters from the great table, and you'll get your message. But when they did that, it was gibberish. There was no message there. So later on, Kelly came back and said, I just had a vision from Raphael, and he said we need to switch around the tables. So they switched the tables around, renumbered all the squares, and then they got a message. They were able to decrypt the message, and the message was God telling Dee, yeah, go ahead and swap wives. That's what I want you to do.
Okay.
That was the reason for the existence of the reform table of Raphael. It had nothing to do with the magical system. It was not a replacement for the original Great Table. So the Golden Dawn took the reformed table and created an entirely new tradition based on that. And it's entirely linked into the Golden Dawn tradition and its mysteries and teachings, with their specific correspondences for everything, which is an entirely separate concern than the de-purist stuff, which doesn't have anything.
See, that's something I did not like make that connection. I was thinking like it was all sort of based off of this one thing, but they went one way with it, but D was kind of this other thing or something. But okay,
exactly. It was just a mistake on the part of Mathers, or probably Westcott, because like I said, he was the Enochian guy. And he just saw that entry and he saw the reform table and thought, well, this is the one. This is the one we should use. But he didn't read back far enough. He didn't understand the context. So by taking this alternative great table, they literally created an entirely separate tradition. And I prefer the de-purist one, but I have conflict with, I mean, there's some things I would have done differently in the Golden Dawn's version, to be honest with you. Some of the correspondences they put in really baffle me. Like I would have done them differently. But just as a system, as this is the Golden Dawn's Enochian system, which I call Neo-Enochian, it's fine. There are people that use it successfully, and I know about it. I have to take tests on it to go up in the grades in my order. So it's fine. It's just not my thing. I like the old stuff.
Cool. Okay. And so like I wonder in this instance, when like he's saying if God himself has communicated this, in his conception of God, is this in reference to the demiurge, like that sort of God, or like the Christic
Now, you remember that dichotomy I told you between the Gnostic stuff that kind of puts the demiurge between the highest God and us, but then the Christian and Jewish stuff does not. The creator and the highest God to them is the same thing. There's no middleman. And now Enochian magic is heavily influenced by Gnosticism, but D was a devout Christian. So he didn't believe in a demiurge between us and God. So you're looking at a much more Valentinian style of Gnosticism in the Enochian system than Sethian.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Cool. All right. Well, man, this was so amazing to me. I learned a lot. Before I kind of close out and ask you about like your links and your books, your classes, anything that you want to mention, I just want to ask you if there's any things that you want to put out there as far as any thoughts, anything you feel is important to touch on, any messages, really just anything at all. If you feel like anything else comes up, feel free. And if not, no worries.
Yeah, it's always such a tough one. That's always such a tough one because I never know who's listening, and what your particular audience needs to hear. But I would like to go back to what we kind of started with, and you said that there's this fear, this idea in the public consciousness that anything occult is by definition something satanic or evil or dark, and what I would say to anyone listening that has that impression. And even though we started right off talking about Satanism, the Satanism stuff is separate. I've known Satanists and I know about them, but that's not what I do. And occultism, though it's been hyped up a lot to be this evil and dark and dangerous thing, there are dangers, but just evil thing. But what it really is just another form of shamanism. And that's one of the main thesis of my book, Secrets of the Magical Grimoires, is that you go back to the ancient, the Goan, and you go back to these different shamanic tribal groups, and the roles that were once filled, the social roles that were once filled by the shaman. The priest took over some of them, but not all of them. Once we moved into settled city-states with established temples rather than being wandering tribes. So the priest took over some of the role of the shaman, but not all of them. So those roles, those shamanic roles, fell to different people. And we got a different kind of shamanism because now we're in an urban setting rather than a natural indigenous kind of setting. Now you're in a city. And what we call occultism today is just the urban shamanism of its time. They were healers. They were, if you were having relationship trouble, you'd come and get a talisman from them. If you wanted to get pregnant, you come and get maybe an elixir from them, or they were just serving a social role. And it was a social role that the church wanted to shut down. So they put a whole lot of effort into making people doing that sound evil and bad and satanic. But it's not. It's just continuing a role and a service for your community that has been fulfilled for for all of human history, really, and it just kept going regardless of the church trying to make it illegal. So yeah, it's not all dark and satanic and evil and scary. It's just an alternative spirituality is what it is.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that can't be overexpressed enough, especially with us, like in the community, kind of putting ourselves out there, talking about these things. It's just so easy to get conflated with these negative associations. So I always like to kind of draw attention to that stuff. So thank you.
And there's a lot of people out there pushing satanic panic too. So yes. That's no fun.
No. Okay. So what do you got going on? I think you got some classes going on, if I'm not wrong. Maybe your books, what some of your books you want to throw out there for people if they're interested in learning more about your work, anything at all?
Sure. Most of what I got out there is kind of on the grimoire side of things. So if you're interested in like Solomonic mysticism and this old pre-Golden Dawn Western occultism, my first book was Secrets of the Magical Grimoires. It's a little dated now because we've learned a lot more since when I published it 23 years ago. But it's still the best primer for the tradition, and it'll go over a lot of the history and context, how and why the books were written, and then it's going to go over what's in the books. So it'll give you a good grounding. And also I do offer classes online. I offer a basic Solomonic magic course. And I just launched an advanced course. So there's a 101 course and a 201 course. You do have to be in the 101 course first to go into the 201. And I also just released a class on meditation and full body relaxation. I literally just released that this morning. So that's out there and available. You can find me on Facebook, Aaron Leitch, or you can find my shop, Doc Solomon's Occult Curios, on Facebook, or we have our own website. And you can buy a lot of very obscure magical related items, like consecrated parchment, thread spun by a young virgin, all the weird stuff that the grimoires asked for. We got a lot of that stuff. And I think that's about it for my projects at the moment. I'm focusing mostly on getting the 201 course written. I've got the first section released, and I've got several sections that I'm still putting together.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate your work and everything you got going on. So love this conversation. And
again, thanks for having me on and inviting me. And these are always fun. So as long as you have fun listening to me ramble, then
oh yeah. I love it. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Until next time.